Thank you so much, everybody, for being on here with us tonight. I am really excited about this. I'm excited to learn more about this because if anybody saw my post on LinkedIn, this is definitely something that would have stuck with me had we had some sort of awesome literary tie-in to or literacy tie-in to esports or something more relevant than just you know To Kill a Mockingbird than just that. So which is Christy's favorite book. So that is why I needed to say that reference. Thank you again, everybody, for being here. My name is Alex Herby, Education Manager for Play Versus, and I'm joined today by the rest of my team here for the education at Play Versus is Dr. Christy Custer, Dr. Michael Russell. They'll be helping us out. Mike's going to be running chat, so any of the questions that you have for both our panelists, our experts here in literacy, as well as for myself, for Christy, please throw those in chat. That way Mike can get those either addressed to us or answer those himself. So Mike, thank you so much for running the chat. And then our wonderful panelists, experts in literacy. Thank you so much, Dr. Hannah Gerber and Dr. Luis Perez Cortez. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm very excited about the expertise that you're going to be handing over to us and kind of explaining your world because up until a few weeks ago, this was a field I did not know even existed, right? So you are the case study, as well as most of us here are the case study for the job you want or have hasn't been invented yet, right? Until you get there. We're preparing you for jobs that haven't been invented yet. So, again, so great to have everybody here. Christy, do you want to kick us off here and kind of go around with just an introduction, and then we'll get to Dr. Gerber and Dr. Perez.
Sure. Thank you so much, Alex, for setting up for us. And it's good to see everyone. I am super excited because rarely in the esports world do I get to play with my literary colleagues. So I'm super excited about this. Christy Custer, just introductions. I was an educator for 24 years in the high school space. And so I was an English teacher started out. And then I became a high school principal, and I was at an alternative school for at-risk kids for 20 of those 24 years. And so my experience with esports is all about engagement and meeting students where they're at and getting students excited. And so when I came across Dr. Gerber and Dr. Perez Cortez, I was so excited to talk to you guys and learn from you and what your experience is and what your research for both of you has found.
Mhm. All right, kicking us around here, Dr. Gerber, if you want to give us a quick intro bio for yourself, and then we'll kick it over to our other wonderful panelists.
Sure. I'm Hannah Gerber, and I'm a professor of literacy at Sam Houston State University and also an honorary professor at University of South Africa. So I like to say I bridge continents.
Yeah.
My research has been for 20 years now in gaming and literacy, so I'm just super excited to share with you all. I've been involved at my university, not the last few years, but when their esports team started, I was a faculty sponsor. So I've kind of been in it with the students as well. So
Wonderful. Okay, Dr. Perez Cortez.
Hello, yes, my name is Luis Perez Cortez. I think I'm also an English educator, so I was very happy to hear you say that you were also earlier, because I think there's something about us that just draws us to these kinds of things, I feel like. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Texas at Arlington. I've researched language learning before with games. That was my first true love academically. That's when I discovered, wait, you can do this
Mhm.
professionally, like for work, you can research games. So that's what set me down this path many, many years ago. That was also back then an example of what you said earlier about the job you want doesn't exist yet. Well, that was back then, and here I am
Mhm.
now. And over here at UTA Arlington, I teach instruction and learning design technologies now, but I still do research in games, with games and around games of all kinds, digital and tabletop. And I am very happy to talk about esports, which is something that I delved really deeply into for my doctoral dissertation.
Mhm.
Wonderful. Yes, absolutely. So again, kicking us around here, Christy and I are going to be kind of moderating the discussion with our panelists here, and just kind of adding, because I'm sure that we aren't going to be able to touch the literary research as much as our experts here, but adding some color and commentary to that. And so again, if you have any questions, please throw those in chat. And then if you have to leave for anything, know that this will be posted on our YouTube channel later this week. So if you want to catch this after it's been recorded, it will be there for your viewing. So Christy, do you want to go ahead and get us started for today?
Sure. So Alex and I, when we met to talk about what we wanted to talk about today, I thought I'd kick us off with just a story maybe that many of us have in our purview. And the way that I got here is I do not play video games. Well, I always say that, and then I have to go back and say I Rockstar Pac-Man. I have one here in my house, and I Rockstar Super Mario Brothers. I like the repetitive games, and so I'm great at those. But video games are not really the thing that I love. But I love students. And a lot of this got started because I'm an author, as Alex and Mike are. We're authors on the Gaming Concepts curriculum, and that is the way that we bring gaming and esports into schools for credit classes. And so I just to bring everybody kind of together, what I do or what we do is take a speech class, for example. Most students hate speech, most adults hate speech. But if you put a microphone and a video camera in front of a kid and call it streaming or shoutcasting, you cannot have enough chairs in that class. And so a lot of this started for me actually almost 30 years ago when I was a very young, wide-eyed English teacher and started at the alternative school. And a student walked into my class and said, I hate school, I hate English, and I'm probably going to hate you. And I thought, uh-oh, I'm in trouble here. And I didn't get mad. So, by whatever, school gods that saved me on this, because he was a pretty tough kid. And I said, well, what do you like? And he said, that took him for a loop right there that I am even interested in what he likes. And he said, well, I like auto mechanics. And I said, well, instead of writing this 5-paragraph essay on, the Globe Theater, why don't you write me a work order on, you know, why a transmission needs changed in a vehicle? And that kid probably had not turned in an assignment in years. And he, left me for a couple days, didn't really talk in class, and he was just typing away on his computer and brought me probably 5 pages of misspelled, mispunctuated, miss everything. But he turned that in and he was so proud, and I was so proud. And it gave us a starting point, not only in literacy, in reading and writing, but it also gave us a starting point in our relationship. And so that was a light bulb for me, and everything became about what is the standard or what is the skill that I'm trying to teach the kid and not the content that I'm necessarily trying to teach the kid. And so that's really where gaming concepts started that long ago, and then it evolved into what do you like? I hate school, I hate English. Well, what do you like? I like video games. And as we all know, 90 some percent of kids now play video games. So it's really a unifying element. And that's where Mike came in because he did like video games. And so he could teach it out of his head. And so that's where a lot of this came from. And so I wanted to use that. Alex and I were talking about where do we start here because we really don't necessarily know one another. And so let's maybe start there. And a lot of us have that commonality. And so we'll start out with you, Dr. Gerber. What specific literary skills do students, naturally practice in gaming environments? I know that, we're going to talk about gaming environments, but it's really all of these environments that kids love. And, how can teachers intentionally build this into their classrooms, especially since it's so hot? I mean, they just love it. They love video games.
Thank you so much, Christy, for sharing your story as well. I feel like my story actually was probably pretty similar as a former high school English teacher. And I've told this story many times before, but it's very it has some similar touches where I remember a group of students would come back to my classroom for lunch every day because it was kind of an open lunch period. I opened my classroom and they were very much into gaming. And I listened to them, but I looked at that also as a missed opportunity as an English teacher and a literacy educator and a literary educator, that I listened, but I wasn't as open at that time because of the taboo nature. I have since changed that, and I changed it very quickly, as I kind of started really listening to what they were doing. Because when you look at what students are doing when they are involved within gaming, particularly within esports, the depth of the connections that they're making among and between what you would call the modes of communication, which is reading, writing, listening, speaking, viewing, and presentation, are so deep. Just the simplest thing to look at how somebody is navigating a Discord chat is packed with so much that from the critical analysis to how they're, engaging with each other, to being able to respond to each other on the fly, to listen and have the voice over internet communication. I think it's just kind of taking a look at this large ecosystem and realizing that there is a place for every single student when they are engaged with these environments. And that's just kind of, I would say, a broad brushstroke of what I see as some of these skills.
Yeah. And Dr. Perez Cortez, your thoughts on, for our audience, what are they learning? So many times they see playing video games and what are they learning?
Well, I think the most skeptical among us would say that they aren't, right? They're not learning anything. They're just wasting their time. They're just playing these useless games. Why are they doing that when they could be doing something productive, right?
Yes.
I think that's often something that in esports, in schools specifically, we kind of run into as an obstacle from many people. I think less so as time goes by, but it's still there. But like Dr. Gerber was saying, they learn many things. So for example, I'm thinking students in esports communities, and that doesn't mean that they're the player themselves, doesn't mean that they're the ones holding the controller and actually pressing A to do whatever, right? There's a community around that act. Well, the players in that community, I think they practice things like argumentative writing. So if you can think of it like they're convincing teammates about strategies, what to do here, what not to do there. They can practice things like expository writing when they create like a guide for a game that they're really trying to master. They use persuasive language when they're recruiting teammates to kind of hop on board or not, right? And depending on how they're structuring and presenting whatever they're trying to say, right? They can practice multimodal ways of communicating, do things like memes and highlight reels. Like if you look at a Discord, I think this is just a made up stat, but like probably 80% of messages on a Discord chat are memes. So I think teachers can build on these by having students kind of translate those skills into academic genres. So for example, I think moving from a Discord debate, just to keep a focus on Discord for a second, moving from a Discord debate about which hero or legend is the best to a persuasive essay using textual evidence or multimodal evidence to convince others of that is one skill that is baked in many English standards, right? Skills in writing and persuasive writing is one popular one. So those are just some of the ideas that I've had that I think directly tie to this topic and this conversation.
Right.
Absolutely.
And I like what you're saying, where you're making the tie between the video game and what English teachers know so well, because I am a huge proponent for English teachers, all teachers, but especially English teachers. Many English teachers have such a great concept of the curriculum. They have a great grasp. They're rock star teachers, yet they might not have that gaming background. And I said, you don't have to have the gaming background. The kids have the gaming background. The kids know about the games. The students know about the games. You just have to be able to make the connections. And I think that English teachers are naturally great at, making connections from characters to curriculum, from the environment to the curriculum. They draw from literature and writing so easily that I said you will easily be able to, once you're just observe, and then you're going to be able to make those connections.
Yeah, and I think the power is as we have this kind of this generation of video games, as opposed to previous versions of video games, is they're so steeped in either canon or storytelling or story development. And as students play through that, then you have a real argument for it being a creative writing exercise, right? Where
Mm.
you're building maybe onto a plot line or a quest line in creative dialogue, but then also, like you said, Dr. Perez Cortez, in informational writing and reading, right? Which kids are, notoriously bad at, is technical writing and informational writing. And so, esports and video gaming has a huge impact on being able to touch at least on a lot of these different facets of literacy and ELA development. I want to dive into what kind of evidence and research that we're seeing, that you guys have been working on. And so, Dr. Gerber, your research highlights the intersection of games, literacy, identity. What does the evidence say about the impact of gaming on literacy development?
That's a great question. Thank you so much, Alex. Some of the research, and I can take this all the way back to some of my earlier research and show the ties through time. But if you were to look at a traditional English language arts classroom, a student would be time on task, and this is some data actually from my dissertation, would be what I say time on task, meaning time within the literacy components of the class, which is the reading, writing, listening, speaking, viewing, about 10 minutes of a 50-minute class. That's the amount of time they would actually spend immersed in literacy acts. When you take a same observation and you plop it down inside of a gaming environment and you start to overlay the amount of, okay, well, they're reading while they're also writing, while they're also listening, it comes up to about 210 minutes of actual immersed time within these literacy acts. So you get a very deep immersion when it's gaming. So the research right away points to just the simple fact that gaming environments are really rich, immersive spaces for helping make connections with students between literacies. And I use the word literacies in the plural because literacy is not static. It's not simply this print bound or you read what you read. That is not the case. It's bound in identity, it's bound in culture, it's bound in social aspects, it's bound in economic aspects. And so when you take a look and you unpack that and you allow students to be able to make connections between these identities that they're developing within games and then the class material, you just end up with very rich experiences. Kind of as Dr. Perez Cortez was saying, it's opening up and showing them that they're actually doing persuasive arguments. They are doing creative writing. They are learning how to navigate multimodal environments, from user interfaces to really complex maps, and then being able to digest that and then really quickly make decisions. So I guess just to answer quickly, that's the research says games are great.
Yeah. And I want a follow-up question for that. Is there, from the research that you've done, and Dr. Perez Cortez, please jump in if you have some data to this, is there a magic number where you're seeing effective outcomes with students for time on instruction for literacy? So they, in a lesson, they spend 10 minutes, and 10 minutes every day or 3 times a week. That is our magic number we're trying to hit for increased comprehension or understanding in what we're trying to do.
I'll answer really quickly, and then if you want to jump in, Dr. Perez Cortez, I don't have specific data on like how much time. I would say that we do need to balance students between environments and among environments, so it's a mix of digital and analog. But I will say there is research that supports this was done not by myself, but by a scholar named Constance Steinkuhler. And she did some research about 15, 20 years ago as well that looked at the complexity of what students were reading within these gaming texts, these gaming worlds, predominantly with the walkthrough manuals and the different kinds of paratexts that are consumed alongside games, which still happen within esports. And students who were traditionally struggling readers, you would say multiple grades below level, 3, 4, 5, 6 grades below level, when they were confronted with gaming material, they were able to read at 6, 7 grades above level. So it just gives this kind of indication of just how important the interest is with the materials that we're putting in front of students. So as far as like amount of time that we should be promoting, I don't have an answer on that. Dr.
Yeah.
Perez might, but yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I think I'm on the same boat there. I don't have a magic number, although I would be very inclined to believe that the more, the better. But I think just like what you were saying, I think the importance is in diversifying where and from who students are getting exposure to any of their literacies, as you're saying in the plural. Games, I mean, there's a lot of things that make games good learning experiences. They're well designed and intentioned to be the ways that they are. They're often long and drawn out, challenging experiences. People still engage in them and pay a lot of money to engage in those experiences. So there's something to be said about how they're designed, but also the fact that they are interesting to a lot of students who would oftentimes believe or say about themselves that they aren't good at reading, that they don't like reading, for example, right? But yet when you look at what they're doing for their hobby or their interest, and if it involves games, it most often involves a lot of reading and a lot of complex reading and making sense of so much information from different sources, from different modalities, and then interacting, especially nowadays, interacting around that interest with people from across the world who speak all other languages and have other cultural backgrounds. So yes, this has been studied for so long now. I want to say since the early 2000s is when this kind of really kind of skyrocketed the interest academically. But I think it keeps showing the same or similar result, and it's that games as a space, as an affinity space for a lot of learners is very, very powerful for developing the kinds of things that schools also value, like reading and reading comprehension and communicating and interacting. From a personal example, I was one of those students. I didn't like reading, or so I thought, until I realized that, hold on, I'm playing a lot of the Pokemon games, right? Pokemon games on the Game Boy. That was nothing but reading. Sure, it had some cute and cool sprites here and there, but if you wanted to do anything and get ahead in the game, you probably had to have some amount of reading comprehension and develop interest in what you're doing through the text that you're reading. So that's just one quick example from my side. But just to kind of circle back there, no magic number, but I think diversifying where these experiences and skills come from is very, very important. And games and gaming and esports being a part of that gaming sphere is a very, very crucial one nowadays.
Okay, absolutely. So I want to ask again, a follow-up question, and just to clarify for those that are going to be watching this. So there is research behind this that if students are reading text, passages, books, content that they are more inclined to like or passionate about, their opportunity to learn from that is higher than, say, if they were given an economics textbook and said to read, right? That's the gist. Very good. Okay, so I know which books I need to switch to then. So.
Well, I want to jump on something because I don't think it's talked about enough also, and what you said, Dr. Perez Cortez, is that you were in the Pokemon game. Typically that game in particular is alone, or you could be alone, playing alone. And you wanted to read about the sprites, you wanted to read about there's a scaffolding there also that the teacher doesn't have to do, that's independent, because you can slow down the text, you can take your time with the text, you can go whatever direction it is with the text. It's almost like you're providing as a young person your own scaffolding uh, by not having to keep up with the class, but the teacher doesn't have to take time away from the class either to slow down or embarrass you because you can't read aloud. And that is something that I don't think we talk about enough, is the natural scaffolding that's involved in video game literacy that we don't even think about.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And this kind of hints on this a little bit, but there's a question that we've got in chat here that Mike just told me about. But Braun, hey Braun, how you doing? Games are not all the same value. What genres of games offer the most opportunity for ELA? So I'll pitch that to whoever wants to answer first.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. I think from the get-go, if you're looking at just the game as its own independent thing, disconnected from anything else you could look at that's around the game, right? So I think for literacy development purposes, probably things or games that have text in them that require some comprehension of the written word would be helpful to understand the written word. So in that sense, role-playing games come to mind often as a popular, game that I default to saying like, yeah, that is probably one game that if you want to practice those kinds of skills, those are the kinds of games that have the most amount of text in them. But that doesn't mean that's the only place you can get that kind of practice. Because for example, that's just taking the game in isolation, like I was saying. But even games that don't have the text in them, let's suppose there's a game, I can't think of one right now, but let's imagine there's a game or a game genre that has 0 words in the actual game. You can still find that exposure in the communities that form around that video game. Online forums, for example, Twitch streams or Twitch chats, Discord servers, things like that. Even real world, think of the school playground communities that form around people that play the same game and are talking about it. So in that sense, the game itself is independent of that other activity, but it fuels it very, very strongly. But if you're thinking of and looking for specific games and the skills that are on your mind are, reading, then picking game genres that have a lot of reading in them will probably serve you best. I don't know if Dr. Gerber agrees with that.
Sure. I'll jump in. Thank you, Braun, for your question, and thank you, Alex, for kind of wrangling that in so that we could address it. I'll take a two-pronged approach to this. I 100% agree that not all games are created equal. And unfortunately, I think what often happens within the educational sector is we take a look at commercial off-the-shelf games as something that happens outside and doesn't belong in the classroom, doesn't belong in school, is taboo, which is where we've been circling around. And when we look at education, I'll pull some, this was about 15 years ago. I was doing an ethnographic study inside of public libraries with one of my dear friends, Sandra Shamrath Abrams. And we both were in different library spaces and doing ethnographic research of the video game library programs. And Dr. Perez, you had mentioned Pokemon. And so this one boy that I was watching, and I was taking some notes and I was talking to him, and I said, he was giving me he was 6 years old, giving me incredible depth and connections between how these characters related to other characters, math, like all of these just deep, deep connections. And his mom said to him, tell this nice lady about those games you play in school, like Math Ninja. And he goes, Mom, those games are boring. So I think it's really important to kind of understand that when we're looking at building literacies with students, we match the game with what the student is actually interested in. So for instance, some students will get a lot out of first-person shooters. Some students will get a lot out of, MOBAs, or what we're talking about sometimes with esports, the online battle arenas. Some students are going to get a lot of benefit out of some of the RPGs. So I had this is just another quite little tangent of a story. Another participant in a study for my dissertation 20-something years ago, he was in the English classroom. And I think this is going to be particularly salient to English teachers, where when I sat down and I interviewed him, he was also ethnographic research, where I followed them at school and then followed them home to look at their gaming literacies. And he was in the middle of collaboratively writing a 500-page novel with a friend from class. However, in class, he was not a good English student. Teacher even had indicated he was not a good English student. And so I told him to tell me a little bit about this novel he was writing. And he said, well, me and so, we found a 20-year gap in the history books that did not exist, and it overlays with Morrowind, and it gives us complete control to write our story how we want. And I said, oh, that's so great. So, you're doing some writing like an English class. And he goes, well, what this isn't really writing, which is traumatic as an English teacher to think about, right? So it's helping us bridge those gaps for the students and also matching the genre with the student. And they can find, as Dr. Perez Cortez was saying, we can find literacy anywhere, whether it's their ability to deconstruct characters in Pokemon or to write a 500-page novel based off of an RPG. So
I think in our world, what we do in gaming concepts, it's called purposeful play. Let's talk a little bit about the importance of purposeful play. What's the difference between play, which is valuable, don't get me wrong, but there's play and there's purposeful play. And I think that maybe what we're talking about here is that kids, if they don't realize what they're learning, yes, that's still important, but when they can make that connection, that's often the bridge that you're talking about, Dr. Gerber, is often the teacher is providing that bridge and they're saying, look what you're doing, look what you're learning.
Mhm.
And so, Dr. Perez Cortez, can we start with you? What are some, and we keep going back to English teachers, but as we know, although the burden often falls to English teachers for reading and writing, but it crosses every subject in school. But what are some practical strategies for teachers to embed esports into either English language arts lessons or history lessons or math lessons? What are some things that teachers can do without require, like, we have the full curriculum and the full, we call it the sprinkle. If they don't want to do a full curriculum, what are some things that people can sprinkle just to add that interest level and maybe capture some of those kids that are sitting in class going, this is so boring?
Yeah, great question. I think it's very, very appropriate to think about this as starting small. Like, don't
Mhm.
redesign your curriculum overnight, even though if you want to go the extra 2 miles, okay, but I don't think you have to get started into this thing. I think one simple entry point is text analysis. So for example, you can give students patch notes, or if you're thinking of esports specifically, like patch notes or tournaments recaps, and ask them to identify, for example, in English class, do a rhetorical analysis. How are they convincing and influencing emotions and things like that? I think another strategy can be writing us, and these might have to be rethought to avoid, to have AI maybe complement these, because you could probably just plug
Mm.
these into ChatGPT and it'll do it for you. But I think that's an extra challenge that we can have to grapple with now about how to use that effectively. I don't
Mhm.
think we should completely ban it, maybe think with it, but that's a conversation for another day.
Right.
But a strategy is to, have writing assignments that mirror what happens in esports. So what I mean by that is to have students create player profiles, to write persuasive essays about best strategies, um, or they can even draft a commentary script as a way to practice that kind of thing. I know that usually happens on the fly when you're watching things play by play. And let me tell you, that is an incredible skill
It
because
is.
I can't do it. I think these people have to talk faster than they can think, and I can't do it.
Mhm.
But it's a very valuable skill. So practicing it by coming up with a script, maybe from a pre-recorded tournament, that could be useful too.
Yeah.
I think all of these can be useful and authentic tasks that connect somewhat seamlessly, right, to standards like argumentative writing. Um, excuse me, I'm thinking of these from my English teacher
Yeah.
background, but
Yeah.
argumentative writing, audience awareness, and things like narrative analysis, I think connect really beautifully and, like I said, almost seamlessly to those kinds of tasks that are around esports.
hmm And when you're talking about that narration to the games, you're talking about shoutcasting and
Yeah,
streaming
yeah.
for those that don't know. And it's just like a football game. The broadcasters, they're you're watching the game, but they're providing that color commentary. That is exactly the same thing that is happening with video games. And I love the idea of the pre-recorded because they don't have the skill right off the bat, so they can pause, they can rewind, they can edit, cut,
Mhm.
paste. All of those things are what you would do in an English paper. You can pause, rewind, rethink, erase. I love it. Dr. Gerber?
Yes, great. Yeah, I'll add to that. So thank you, Dr. Perez Cortez, for some of his really insightful ideas of ways that English teachers can weave in some of these literacies. One of the things that I think we haven't quite touched on that I think is a great skill that helps students think through future literacies is this idea that's deeply embedded within esports, and it's something you could call cross-functional teams. And cross-functional teams, and we look at, I'll explain what that is in a second, but when we look at the development of cross-functional teams, which means everybody has a role that has somewhat of an equal status, which is actually a divergence from what we've seen from previous gaming research from 15 years ago, which really talked about the Pareto principle, which was like 80% of the people do 20% of the work and 20% do 80. So with what we have when we look at these cross-functional teams, and if we're talking about just the players, each one of them has a very vital role. And if we look at then the entire ecosystem, which Dr. Perez Cortez touched on with the shoutcasters, with the different within any even kind of Twitch stream, you've got moderators or mods. You have people that are programming in the bots that can answer. So you've got a lot of complex skills there. I think one of the things that would be really powerful for some of the English teachers who are really wanting to kind of step out is think about how can I change this idea of group work, which is often students hate. And actually, if you look at, you can speak to, notice in the chat we have people from all over the world in here. And in America, we say collaborate. But actually, if you use the word collaborate in different cultures, it means traitorous cooperation with the enemy. So we don't want to have collaboration, we want to have teamwork, right? So when we think about this, we're teaching then teachers how do we help students build these cross-functional teams where they're all together engaged in this ecosystem. So whether you put a game in the classroom and you have one of the students creating these VODs, which are the videos on demand, which Dr. Louise Dr. Louise, I was going to I'll call you your name, Louise, that they're working together. Some are doing that. Some are taking and doing some critical analysis of representation, power, and bias that's existing that can be brought into the shoutcasting script. So they're giving that data and that information then to the shoutcaster. So you end up with this ecosystem. And I think that's what makes the esports sector so powerful. It is an ecosystem and it requires cross-functional teamwork. And that's really what I think we want to move English teachers towards, to be able to create this dynamic collaborative there. I just said this dynamic team within their classroom, that all of these students have different roles, but they're producing something that then comes out that's unified.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another aspect of it is that, you're drawing these kids in with these really awesome lessons or connections to things that they love. But then on the back end, right, I'm not a literacy teacher. I never taught ELA, but we've all gone through parent teacher conferences, a lot of us here, and then on the chat as well. And you have to prove that what you're doing sometimes is working, right? And so that's something that I love about, what we have is offering the data behind it. And Christy mentioned one aspect of what we have, which is purposeful play. Another is journaling in the curriculum, to have that kind of, not necessarily rote instruction, but to have that practice every day of adding literacy or adding reflection into the lesson. And so being able to pull that from the platform and show writing progression over time is invaluable, I think, in research, to show students and parents and administrators that, hey, kids are advancing through what we've been teaching them, whether it's adding little snippets or sprinkling in esports in here. We're seeing a progression over time. To get these kids involved in the writing process and also into the learning process. So there's a lot of different ways that we can add to our classrooms, right? Lots of different ways. And it just, like, Dr. Perez Cortez said, it just starts small. Start something very simple, right? Because you already do enough, right? So something small. Christy.
Mike, you have a question?
Yes, I was actually typing the answer, but I'm happy to ask it if we want me to ask it. Okay. So Kevin asked, would shoutcasting work well for middle school level esports?
Our expert. I defer to our experts. I know what they're going to say, but I defer to them.
Yeah, I don't mind going first if you don't. Yeah,
Please.
so I think yes, I think it would is the brief answer.
Mhm.
I think a lot of the what's the word, the obstacle you'll encounter in at the middle school level is just a stricter version of what you'll encounter at the high school level, which is what kinds of games they can be, engaged with or being exposed to. I have a friend who is a high school, sorry, a middle school school psychologist, and he's trying to get an esports up and running program in his school. And that's often the barrier he comes up with, is that the games that they're allowed to play at that level isn't necessarily the ones that the students really want to play or engage with, but there's still a lot of options available to that level that include very naturally shoutcasting. The one that I can think of is Super Smash Brothers on the Switch, most recent one, Super Smash Brothers Ultimate. I think that's far and away, in my experience, when I work with teachers in their classrooms who are just trying to get something up and running in their schools, is they often start off with one Switch and Super Smash Brothers, and then they kind of go from there. There are different, usually a Nintendo game is what is allowed, and it's easy to bring the console in and just plop it in and play. But yes, the short answer is I think it will work well. There's different ways you can go about it. Like I was saying earlier, you can do a pre-recorded one where they can try to do that and practice it before they do something that's a little bit more or feels more high stakes, maybe in front of a live audience. That feels to me high stakes, and I'm sure would to them as well. But if they can practice it, that's all we want, right? We want them to be a little bit better today than they were yesterday. We don't want them to be as good as whoever else is doing it somewhere else. Um, so yes, I think it will work really, really well. And the shoutcasting doesn't need to be. Also, another problem you might find is that, people often don't want their children's faces or even just likeness or names or anything like that being exposed out there in the internet for
Mhm.
anyone to just see. It doesn't have to be something you divulge like that in that way. It can be something local, something much more off the grid in a way, where they're just shoutcasting things in their own classroom, in their own school club, things like that. I think would work well for middle school.
Yeah, and middle school especially is a great time for them to start building these kind of public speaking, you know, abilities and the talent that comes behind public speaking, because not everybody can come up to class or start shoutcasting or improv right on the spot, right? So it does take some, practice, right? You can't just become some sort of shoutcaster overnight and become some sort of Twitch sensation.
Yeah.
Not many people have that ability, and one of my favorite things is that we mention in the books is doing like shoutcasting real life as practice is one of the
Mhm.
activities to do in there. And it's just, as kids go down the hall, shoutcast them. What's going on? What's the conversation happening, right? And so some really neat, just kind of, public speaking activities that can bring about the learning process and the talent behind it. Yeah.
Alex, I want to move on to another section, but another topic. But Denise asks a great question. Just to kind of wrap up, we talked about specific, lessons and specific activities. But Denise, thank you so much for this question because in secondary schools where time is limited, what are the best practices to incorporate the right amount of gaming? That's a very succinct question, and we appreciate that. Dr. Gerber, can we start with you, and then Dr. Perez Cortez will move on with you also.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much for your question, Denise. So I would say that one of the things that I've always been a proponent of is also not forcing gaming onto students who aren't gamers, right? So you can bring in gaming at a whole class level with perhaps, let's say, a warm up where you bring in a popular game and you do kind of have students do some critical deconstruction of, I brought it up before, maybe it's gender, race, class that's inside this game, and they're doing a short critical deconstruction. If you as a teacher are new to gaming, that could be enough. And then giving students what I would call workshops, which means that students are then self-leading. And if they're really wanting to spend all of their time with this kind of gaming texts, then they have that opportunity where, for example, the comment was earlier, I think, with Dr. Perez Cortez was talking about Pokemon and reading some books related to Pokemon, that they have that opportunity to build their literacies as they want. But if a student is not into gaming, then they're not being forced down that track. So workshops really help with that. And so I would say you could start off your class with a 5-10 minute kind of warm up that gets kids into this idea of gaming is valid, and then let them run with it. Just a side note, I did a study about 15 years ago inside of a public school, and this is going to tell you the power of gaming, where this was a reading intervention classroom. And the students all of the students in this 10th grade class, this is in Texas, did a survey on how they felt about gaming and if they would want to be in a gaming intervention class for improving their reading skills. It was something like 90% said yes, 10% said no. Well, an accident happened on the back end with when they were building the class out, and the 10% of the students that hated gaming were in the gaming class. So I couldn't make sense of this for the first 2 or 3 days, why these students would come in angry. We had game consoles, we had TVs, we had gaming books. By the end of the first week, I figured out what had happened. I asked students if they wanted to switch. Only one wanted to switch. That was the power of realizing what they could do with gaming. And by the end of that class, there were students that were wanting to go into game design. And these were students who had been talking about dropping out of school before. So that's the power of, if you can just simply just do a little introduction, you can really build some momentum with your students who might be reluctant readers and writers.
Yeah, that's very, very good practical question, because time is always going to be an obstacle for whatever we do. I think so. My thought was, it doesn't even need to start in a classroom as an official thing for a class. I think oftentimes, in my experience, when games are kind of brought to the attention of teachers and they kind of want to bring it in, it's been often as like a school club or after school activity, or just kind of maybe during a lunch hour break where hey, we just need someone to watch over us while we play. Can you do that? I think starting with something like that, where it's not even eating into the class time, can be something that can be useful. And even if you're thinking of something in class, I think maybe although granted, I also think it's very important not to force games on students who don't really like them or want to engage with them.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think it's valuable to expose them to a new text, a new experience, like in the same way that I don't think anyone would argue against exposing a student to a famous, influential literary text or a novel, right? I don't think we often make the case for, if they don't want to read it, let's just not push it on them. We try to find ways to convince them or interest them in it. I think that's the same approach we could take or should take to games too.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't want to pick it up, it's really not interesting, that's also fine. They can learn similar kinds of things from other sources or other types of text too. So that's where my head went from the question and Dr. Gerber's answer.
Yeah. So moving on a little bit, I want to talk about some equity and student engagement here, because both of you have researched this. Dr. Perez Cortez, I'll start with you. How can esports provide a more inclusive space for diverse learners, especially multilingual learners? I know that you've done a lot of research on multilingual learners and students with different literary backgrounds.
I almost forgot to unmute. So yes, wonderful question. I think gaming and esports really are already multilingual. I think you made the observation earlier, Dr. Gerber, that there's people here from many different countries who I'm sure speak many different languages and cultural backgrounds. So that's a testament to that. So these are multicultural spaces. At their best, they really are, and they can be. So I think students encounter English alongside Spanish, Korean, Portuguese, you name it, right? And while they're doing that, and another language can also be internet lingo that they engage with to engage with these kinds of topics too. So that's another separate thing too, that I think is an overall net positive. I think that all can actually can be an advantage for multilingual learners. They get authentic practice, code switching, they translate, they negotiate meaning with each other. And teachers really can highlight and leverage that diversity. So think of someone who can encourage their students to do bilingual commentary, maybe write up multilingual guides, or maybe do an analysis of how the communities around the world talk about the same game. In my case, I'm bilingual Spanish and English. I could really try to do that. I really would have seen myself taking a lot of advantage from an activity like that really early on when I was just getting exposed to English, which the biggest exposure I had personally to English was video games. It's my favorite pastime. I also got it through movies and music, but games by far, I think, beat the rest. So those things, I think, validate students' linguistic assets and their strengths and diversities. And we shouldn't treat that as a deficit that they don't, for example, speak English if they're from another country, but that they can get exposure to it and use it and practice it through this thing that interests them, which is video games and or esports.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that so much now is this kind of digital fluency, right? Like you mentioned, and you have all of these different, components and applications and rules and regulations and things that you have to watch out for, our normal digital literacy or digital citizenship. But, how can we as educators and those watching here help students transfer these digital skills that are learned in gaming to academic and career contexts? And so Dr. Gerber, I'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, sure. And I'll kind of add to some of what Dr. Perez Cortez was saying, and I think it'll tie nicely into your question when we think about this idea of multilingual and multicultural spaces and how that transfers into careers. When we look at modern gaming, and when I say modern gaming, I mean the gaming that we're seeing within the esports ecosystems, the games that are online that have massive backends to the system. That is, I think, a very valuable place to start with understanding that language is also binary bits and ones and zeros. And so helping students also then begin to understand the layers of privacy that they can engage in when online. And so that a very simple way to look at that is one of the things that often happens within esports environments is you will have a lot of communication between different interfaces and different systems. And that happens through something called an API, so application programming interface. And so simply introducing students to the language of APIs, helping them go into developer docs to understand what data are being collected if I use this API key, what does that mean is being collected on me as a person, and how does that impact my privacy? So I think privacy literacy is something that we can easily transfer to our students can easily transfer into the real world. I think that's a really valid way to look at, okay, well then if I'm in a job later in life and my employer asks me to download this on my phone, what is on this app that might be potentially taking data from backends of my system? So I think that's a language in and of itself that can quite easily be transferred into a classroom where you are looking at API literacies and I call it API literacies, but API keys, helping students understand just by looking at the developer docs, what are the data that are potentially being collected and how does that impact my personal privacy? And so that's a whole transferable skill, not just into the English classroom, but just to you as a digital citizen. So I think that kind of touches on a little bit of what you were asking with some of your questions, like, future and digital citizenship, and looking at that as a whole language that we can introduce to our students, because that's very, very important within esports communities, is helping these systems interface with each other. And they have to understand the way the APIs work to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And good informational text reading too, if you want to try and read through some of those documents.
Look at you, Alex, the English future.
I know about technical writing. That's the one thing I do know
true,
about.
True.
But I want to get to one last question just because time is short, and I know that there have been a lot of discussion in chat, so I'm sure people are going to have questions afterwards. I want to leave us with one question. We'll start with Dr. Perez Cortez. Looking ahead, right? How do you see esports reshaping the way that we think about teaching literacy and communication in the next 5 to 10 years?
I almost did it again. I almost started without muting. So great question. I think it's a perfect question to start to wrap up, because it's always good to think of what could be, right? So I, for a while, have seen esports pushing us to think, right, more broadly about what counts as literacy And
Mhm.
I think games did a big part of that for a lot of time, and they still do, video games specifically. But esports is a more recent phenomenon. I think is doing that even more, it's taking the next step, I feel like.
Mhm.
So years from now, let's say 10 years from now, I hope that less people are asking whether gaming is literacy, and more of us will just kind of see it as part of the literacy landscape, because I believe it very much is. Alongside things like novels and films and books and digital media, you name it, right? I think esports will continue to model that authentic um, engagement with different literacies. It can be a form of low stakes and high stakes communication and collaboration. And I think that classrooms really can start to harness that to kind of prep some of our students to not just be readers and writers and in the sense that we've come to know them, but also as critical people, critical citizens that participate in this culture that is now a lot more digital than it was before. Because games have existed for a long time, but digital games have existed for a much more recent time, and esports a little less than that. Um, but this is something that we're all going to continue growing into and living in and expanding on. So I think it makes nothing but sense to start to think of how we can make our students, which are our future, be a part of that future now.
I like what you hit on before, Dr. Gerber. I think, like you said, it's so much, even 2 years ago, it's evolving so quickly, and our parents, more and more, year after year after year, are becoming, they were our video gamers. He, just just evolution in general, that the parents were the gamers. This is what they know, this is what they did, and so we're not so far away either. That these what I will call new parents, they're gamers. Dr. Gerber?
That's actually a great segue because as I was listening to Dr. Perez Cortez speak, I was thinking, looking at that real deep embeddedness of gaming in the classroom, I think what I would like to see in 10 years is it spans classrooms intergenerationally so that you actually have juniors working with helping middle schoolers develop their skills and elementary school students working with the middle schoolers, where you almost have this intergenerational classroom of youth working to build these digital literacies together, these digital skills together. And in fact, I'm going to be a little radical here. I'm going to say I would love to see the youth be able to sit on the boards of education to promote why with these skills they're learning to be able to promote and I mean actually have roles on the boards of education, not just attending the meetings, but a legitimate role where they can advocate for these really critical skills that they know that they're learning. So intergenerational and serving on boards of education, if that can happen in 10 years, my dream would come true.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I think those are, I mean, great ideas, and I love thinking outside the box in terms of, student voice and choice, right? Like they're part of the school. Why not give them an ad hoc seat or something like that with some responsibilities to show them, the processes involved, and then also the intergenerational thing. I love that. As well as what Dr. Perez Cortez, talked about is that, it all benefits the students in a multitude of ways. So why not instigate it? There's data behind it. We have two experts right here that have the data behind it. They're holding it. They've got it. You can share it. So, as we move on, chat's kind of blown up here with some comments and everything, and I love it. I just want to remind everybody and thank everybody for being here tonight, especially to our panelists, Dr. Gerber, Dr. Perez Cortez. This has been super informative, and I've loved the discussion that we've had. Hopefully people can reach out to you if possible on LinkedIn or wherever you're available. If you can throw that into chat, wherever you want to be contacted at. If you want to be contacted, that's okay if you don't. That can go through us. So Mike, thank you. Mike's going to throw some links in for those of you that are wondering where to get all this wonderful content. The top one there is our YouTube, so this will be posted again later this week. If you want to see more of this, we've got a huge series this semester for this kind of deep dive of the educational component of gaming and esports and scholastic gaming and everything involved with that. We do this every other week. So come back, register for another one, like and subscribe on YouTube. That's great. As well as if you want to check out curriculum, you want to check out tournament, Mike has posted those links to those as well. Again, a huge shout out to I'm going to say to the audience, because you guys have been great tonight. Thank you so much for those of you that are on here chatting with us. Love it. And then also, again, another thank you to Dr. Gerber, Dr. Perez Cortez. We can't thank you enough for your expertise in this, your the champions here of literacy in esports, and we appreciate you taking that fight up and doing all that data stuff, all the reading stuff. So that's awesome.
All the reading stuff.
So, Christy, Mike, also thank you helping to support and adding to this, Christy and Mike, and all of you out there. Thanks again for attending and being here, and we will see you next time.